So Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mark Bloodworth. I'm an architect evangelist working for Microsoft in the UK. I've spent a number of years now doing software development and architecture.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with ASP.NET and ASP.NET MVC?
Most of my development career was writing web applications. Started in ASP, moved to ASP.NET pretty much when ASP.NET came out. Initially we wrote in VB.NET and moved to C# very quickly afterwards. So I was writing C# and web forms for quite a few years, and then moved into being more of an architect directly afterwards. So several years of ASP.NET experience.
And when did you first look at ASP.NET MVC?
Probably about it would have been Remix 07 when Scott Guthrie announced that it was available. That was the first time that I took a look at what was involved. I'd been interested in Django and Ruby on Rails before that, so when I heard that there was an MVC framework available in .NET, I was really piqued my interest. So that would have been the first time that I looked at it, and I've looked at it on and off, in the intervening period.
Do you want to take a stab at describing what the MVC model is?
So in a few simple sentences, my take on MVC is that you can separate the three concerns of a web application: so the way that it looks, the way that it behaves, and the way that you describe the data or the entities, so, and keep those three things nicely separated and understand how they behave with each other, how they interact with each other. That would be my simple overview. Oh, so the first thing I'd say, you can achieve a lot of useful stuff in web forms, but equally I've seen some stuff go wrong in web forms. Certainly a lot of code behind it's been very difficult to maintain, and I've seen quite a lot of people have trouble testing web form applications. So it's not because you can't test them, it's just because if you do them in a particular way they can be difficult to test. So those are things that I think MVC is better for. I think that the structure of the application of MVC works closer to the way my mind works than the way that web forms work. That's just a personal thing. But I also think the fact that web forms doesn't try and hide the web paradigm from you is, again, that kind of suits the way I think better.
MVC doesn't try and hide the...
Yeah, did I say web forms? Yeah, so that would be a mistake then. Yeah, so what I meant to say was that MVC doesn't separate you from the web paradigm, which is what you're programming against, whereas web forms presents this leaky abstraction over the top of the web paradigm. And it has a lot of very useful things. So things like view state and so forth can be very useful, but you really need to understand what you're doing. Whereas I think MVC is, you know what you're doing, and it's doing that request response paradigm, so it's more readily understandable.
And you pay a cost for that in terms of you get a lot of assistance in web forms in terms of the controls that let you build things very quickly, and none of that really is available to you in MVC. No,
I think some of it's available, but it's not an area where I've spent enough time to know for sure. But I've certainly heard that that's an issue for some people. I think you can still use master pages, partial views, and so forth, so you can still get quite a lot of reuse in an MVC environment. But it's not as mature either as web forms. So I think that's going to, over time, we'd expect it to catch up.
So you did a project here recently at the Microsoft Technology Centre, I think, using ASP.NET MVC.
So it's a company called I Want Great Care, and that allows you to rate your GP or your specialist, mark them on a variety of different things, like do you trust them, do they listen to you, would you recommend them to other people. So it's an interesting website that's currently written in Ruby on Rails, and so we went through a proof of concept to see how ASP.NET MVC would fit that, and the answer is it fitted very well. In 3 weeks we produced quite a lot with the MVC framework. We are able to integrate it with quite a few other things as well, so like for instance NHS systems, we showed that as an example, so how you could integrate that with an on-site SharePoint system, for instance, or with a third-party website. So we were able to do quite a lot in quite a short period of time with a relatively small team.
Was there anybody involved in the POC who had Ruby experience, Ruby on Rails experience?
Yeah, so we have one of the guys there, CTO, who's kind of done a lot of their Ruby on Rails development. So he was in the room. He got to grips with MVC very quickly. He was also doing SQL Server 2008 rather than MySQL, and that was an interesting opportunity for him as well. I mean, he spent quite a lot of time there looking at things like the report server and that kind of stuff, which he found quite interesting. But there wasn't really any sort of a a challenge that we were aware of in the 3 weeks, in going from, because the concepts are similar. You go about it in different ways. They're not one and the same thing, but there's enough similarity that you can move from one to the other relatively comfortably.
Well, did you have any specific learnings out of that proof of concept?
One thing that I was impressed by was how we were able to add functionality. So one of the things that I did was add mobile support for the application, and that was really easy to add. I had a small portion of time to be able to do that in, and I was able to do it comfortably within that time. And that's it's always nice when you can use the technology and do it within the time you've got available to you. It's not always the case, as we know. It seemed to work well across the team. Everyone seemed to understand what they were doing, being able to kind of do their bit on the project without some of the kind of, well, I'm not really sure where I should put this, because the structure is relatively obvious, so everyone knows where the bits should go. So that was, that all kind of worked out. So I think that it's that kind of having a structure that everyone can work with and being able to work in a team, everyone treading on each other's toes, that work very well.
Talk me through how you added mobile support into the MVC application then.
The way that we did it was to use an action filter, and then that way you can mark a page up with an attribute, and that action filter then applies to that. Sorry, you don't mark a page up, you mark a controller up, and then that action attribute applies to that controller. So if you've got a home controller and you add the attribute, all of a sudden it gets forced through that action filter. And we used an open source mobile XML description file, which is called Wurfel. Subsequently to us completing the POC, there was a couple of sessions at Mix 09 in Las Vegas. There's now a Codeplex project which integrates that mobile device data into the request.browser property, which is much more integrated with ASP.NET and ASP.NET MVC. So that's an improvement over using the information that we used, although it was relatively straightforward to do what we did. And then the other thing that they did in the mix sessions to do it was to use a view engine rather than an action filter. The difference there being that a view engine works across your entire site. Every request for a page goes through that view engine, whereas with an action filter you can only add that to the pages or controllers that you want to add it to.
Right, okay. So their view engine, they were using the same view engine to be able to render mobile pages and...
Yeah, so what they did was they created a new view engine, and in the global ASAX they registered that as the view engine for the site,
yep.
And then they detect, this is a key thing you do in the action filter too, you detect whether the device that's requesting the page is a mobile device or not, and then if it is, you send them to a mobile view,
yep.
And if they're not, then you send them to the default view. And in fact you can get a lot more sophisticated than that. I think if you look at, there's Scott Hansen on post, and there's also this mix session, and they can get quite sophisticated. So if it's got this capability, then send them to this type of page, and you can get down to very, very specific levels. So there's kind of cascading hierarchy, if you like, of views. That's quite loud. So there's a cascading hierarchy of views that you can have, so that you can have like a default mobile view, but if it's got, for instance, Ajax capability, then we could have, we could Ajaxify it to invent a verb, or if it had, whatever capability, then we could add some extra stuff, or if we know this has got better screen resolution, then maybe I can add some extra detail onto the screen. So there's some quite interesting guidance in that mix session around how you can go about how you can go down that road and become a lot more sophisticated than we did. In the proof of concept, we just wanted to show that you could easily add mobile support, but if you take this to the next level, you can do an awful lot.
So where has the I Want Great Care project got to now? What's the status of that proof of concept?
Yeah, so at the moment, there's a website that exists that you can go and use today. The last time I checked, they were in the process of migrating from MySQL Server 2008, and they're getting on quite well with that migration. And the ASP.NET MVC migration is something that's upcoming, and I'm having conversations with their CTO about when is a good time for them to do that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.